She said nothing. The sporadic chanting at the gate reached them between gusts of wind coming off the ocean. After a couple of seconds, Marsalis started away from her in the direction of the water. He didn't speak or look back. It took her his first 3 steps to understand he'd been waiting for her to continue the conversation, and now that she hadn't, he was leaving. "Where are you going?" It came out a lot less casually than she would have liked. He stopped and turned back to her. "Why?" he asked gravely. "Am I in some kind of protective custody?" "Fuck it." "No, it's just," she gestured awkwardly, "in case I need to find you later. In a hurry." He weighed it, the way he had the comment about her work for WP. "I'm going for another walk on the beach," he said. "Want to come?" No." She hesitated. He was waiting. "I need to go over the Montez crime scene while we've got the time, see if there's anything that jumps out." "Is that likely?" "No, but you never know. I've been looking at Merrin's handiwork for the last 4 months. Angeline PD haven't. There might be something." "No direct data interface there, then?" "No. Technically they're not part of RIMSEC. It's the Freeport legislation. Angeline PD have autonomy. They work pretty much like any city police department over in the Republic." "And you're not sharing what you've got on this with any of those guys?" "No, I told you. We don't want a panic on our hands." She threw out a weary signpost arm toward the chanting. "Listen to that. How do you think people like that are going to react to the news that there's a Cannibal 13 loose in North America, murdering selected citizens at his leisure? Remember Sanderson? Eric Sanderson?" A shrug. "Sure. I spent a couple of months looking for him last year just like everybody else. Then you'll remember what it was like. 7 weeks and we nearly had martial law declared in 5 states of the Republic. Media screaming off the screen about clone monsters. Armed mobs trying to break into the tract at Cimarron and slaughter everyone there. Emergency measures all along the Rim frontier. If Sanderson hadn't broken cover when he did, it would have been Jang fever all over again. And all he did was escape. He hadn't killed anybody. With this one, the mobs would go fucking crazy." "Yeah, mobs. You humans have that trick down, don't you?" Sevgi ignored the jibe. "We just don't want another bloodbath," she said doggedly. "We make local police aware that we have an interest, and we give them what help we can, but we can't afford anyone to know the whole picture." He nodded. His walk on the beach seemed forgotten. "So what picture are they getting?" "The cover story in the Republic is Mars Tech, a heist gang and a distribution network squabbling over product." The words tasted stale on her tongue, as concocted and unconvincing as some corporate mission statement. She forced down a grimace and pressed on. "With scumbags like Eddie Tanaka, that's been easy to sell. Elsewhere, when the victim's respectable, we're playing the collateral damage angle. Innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. Or cases of mistaken identity. Sounds a little creaky. What are you doing about the genetic trace?" "Taking it off their hands. The Kalin N-Jins have access to police data stacks right across North America. They fish out anything that fits the profile. That's usually long before forensics get around to running a gene scan on the crime scene traces, so in most cases we get there before anybody knows there's been a 13 at the scene." "Most cases?" "Yeah, been a couple of medical examiners we've had to lean on, get them to shut up." She looked away. "It isn't hard to do that with Kalin authority." "No, I don't imagine it is." She could feel herself flush a little. "Look, I have to get over to the upload building. You want to hit the beach? That's fine." "No, it's okay. I'll walk with you." She gave him a sharp look. He looked innocently back. "May as well look at this Montez myself," he said. "Start earning my keep." So they crossed the apron from the observation tower together, heading for the main complex. There was some heat in the day now, and Sevgi's own slightly stale scent pricked in her nostrils. She began to wish she'd had a shower before she tumbled out of the hospitality suite and into action. "So, you were saying," Marsalis prompted, "the Republic don't know this is linked to Hawkins' pride." "No. The media coverage said there were no survivors. We let them have the cannibalism angle and told them anybody still alive would have been killed on impact. We let them have pictures." "Ah. Yeah." Sevgi curled her lip. Cannibal ghost ship horror. Click for further images. Worked like a dream. They ran with it, splashed it across every site on the net. They completely forgot to do any investigative journalism. Handy. She shrugged. Standard. American media's been taking sensation over fact for better than 100 years now, and secession just loaded the trend. Anyway, it is a miracle Marin survived the crash. Look, he had to find some way to trick the systems into accepting him back into his cryocap, which is glitched to fuck, so the cryogen protocol doesn't work anymore. So he's got to beat that. He's got to persuade the cryocap to fill with gel anyway to drown a live, unsedated body. Not like he didn't have the spare time to work it all out. I know, but that's just a start. He's then got to lie there and let the system drown him unsedated. He's got to breathe the gel unsedated, awake, without his lungs revolting for a good 20 minutes, while Horkin's pride programs its final approach, hits re-entry, course corrects, and comes down in the ocean. A freight loader bulked dinosaur-like on their right, blocking out the angle of the early morning sun. Sevgi shivered a little as they stepped into the long shadow it cast. She looked across at Marcellus, almost accusingly. You want to think what that must have been like? Locked in an upright coffin with that shit filling your nose and your mouth and your throat, pouring in and filling up your lungs, pressing in on your eyeballs, and all around you the whole ship feels like it's shaking itself apart. Maybe is shaking itself apart for all you know. Can you imagine what that would have felt like? I'm trying not to, he said mildly. Do we know how he got ashore? She nodded. First victim in the Bay Area. Ulysses Ward. You saw him on the map last night. Tailored microfauna magnate. He had culture farms all over the Marin County shoreline and a bunch of those tethered plankton trays about 100 clicks off the coast. We don't have the satellite footage to be sure, but it looks like he was out there doing maintenance when Horkin's pride came down, got curious, got too close, got himself killed. Or he went out there specifically to pick Marin up. Yeah, we thought of that too. Rimsec did an engine search, couldn't find any links between Ward and Marin. We went back 40 years. Unless they knew each other in a previous life, this is exactly what it looks like, a bad luck coincidence. How'd he kill him? Cressy shark punch. You ever see anyone killed with one of those things? Sevgi gestured graphically. Designed to stop a great white shark through 10 meters of water. It's practically a hand-held disintegrator. Blew Ward's belly out all over the surrounding furniture. Him plus another employee, name of Emil Nocera, all in the same shot. Thanks for the ride. Right. CSI say there were another couple of employees around at the time, but they ran. Hard to blame them. Yeah, plus they were illegals. Apparently a lot of the casual labor up that way is. They see something, they're not going to hang around and make witness statements. Rimsec are looking, but they don't hold out much hope. Do they know what this is about? Rimsec do, but that's as far as it's gone. There's no public knowledge, we can't afford it, and neither can they. Things are bad enough between Jesus Land and the Rim without word getting out that this guy's treating their precious border security like a knee-high picket fence. But the Rim cops know he's killing in the Republic as well. They've been apprised, yes. Nice of them to keep quiet about it for you. Well, like I said, there's no love lost across the fence lines. And it looks bad if the high-powered, high-tech Rim states couldn't stop some psychotic killer crossing over and going on the rampage in the Republic. You can see how that'd play diplomatically. What, price technology without God on your side? Right. Plus, if word got out that said psychotic killer is a genetic monster? He asked gently. A twist? I didn't say that. No, I guess you didn't. The Republic are already handing their people a line of shit about how the Rim is just a craven appeasement system for the Chinese. And with the stories coming out of China, the Black Lab escapees... She shrugged again. Well, you can see how that one would play as well, right? Pretty much. Nothing like a good monster scare. They cleared the shadow of the freight loader. Sevgi turned her head to beat the sudden glare of the sun and thought she caught a smile slipping across the black man's lips. His gaze had rolled out to somewhere well beyond the gathering of buildings around the nanorack. Something funny? His attention reeled back in, but he didn't look at her. Not really. She stopped. After a couple of paces, so did he, and turned to face her. Something the matter? If you got something to contribute, she said evenly, then I would like to hear it. This isn't going to work unless you talk to me." He looked at her for a long couple of moments. "It's really not very important," he said easily. "I guess you'd call it a resonance." She stood where she was. "Resonance with what?" He sighed. "A resonance with monsters. Do you know what a pistaco is?" She dredged memory, pulled up something from a long-ago briefing on Altiplano training camp crimes. "Yeah, it's some sort of demon, right? Something the Indians believe in? Some sort of vampire?" "Close. Pistaco's a white man with a long knife who comes at night and chops up Indians to get at their body fat. Most likely it's a cultural memory from the conquistadores and the Inquisition, because they certainly weren't averse to a bit of dismemberment in the name of gold and Jesus Christ. But these days, up on the Altiplano, they've got a new angle on the story." "Which is what?" Marsalis grinned. She was appalled at how much it reminded her of Ethan, at how it reached inside and touched her in the place he used to be. "These days," he said, "the Andeans don't believe the pistaco is the white man as such anymore. That's gone. Still the same monster, still looks the same, but now the story they tell is the pistaco's something evil that the white man's brought back." He nodded toward the dark, towering, webbed architecture of the nanorack. "Brought back from Mars." Chapter 15. The sweep and swoop of the codes took hold. Sevgi felt herself dislodged from current reality, turned away from it like a small child guided away from a TV screen by warm parental hands. The couches at Colin, Florida, were clunky, 30-year-old military surplus stock, fully enclosed and soundproofed, and now, in the deadened stillness they created, there was a low chiming that seemed to resonate deep in her guts. From long habit she let herself home in on it. Gentle steerage to the new focus. Look at this. Look at this. The colours above her seemed to mesh into significance just out of reach. The chiming was the beat of her heart, the shiver of blood along veins and arteries, a cellular awareness. The swirling ebbed and inked back, glaring out like antique celluloid film melting through. The standard desert format, inked in. She looked around. Marsalis was not with her. "Good afternoon, ma'am." The Freeport PD face was a handsome black patrolman in his early 20s, insignia winking in the jarringly heatless Arizona sun. The fabric of his short-sleeved uniform had a perfect, factory-fresh texture to it, and so did his flawless, airbrushed skin. Muscle roped his forearms and bulked out his shoulders. He might have stepped, Sevgi thought sourly, out of the early stages of a porn Xperia, the storyline section before the clothes came off. She guessed the intention was to inspire confidence and respect for the symbols of Angeline law enforcement, but all it did was put her on the edge of a giggle, and make her slightly warm. Oh well, at least it isn't another fucking body-perfect uber bitch. More than slightly warm, in fact. I'm waiting." "For a colleague." The face nodded. "He's incoming, but it's taking some time. May I see your authorization?" Sevgi lifted an open palm and watched as the skeins of bluish machine code fell out of it. They splashed on the ground with a faint crackling and disappeared into the dirt as if soaked up. Despite the colour, it felt uncomfortably like watching herself bleed through a slashed wrist. At least, what she'd imagined it would when... "Stop that." "Thank you, ma'am. You are clear to proceed." Ahead of her, the familiar Adobe data homes swam rapidly into existence. The face stepped aside to indicate Sevgi's new status. "Your colleague, also." She hadn't noticed. Beside her, Marsalis was shading in. Looking at him as he solidified, she suddenly lost all interest in the patrolman. The attraction was in the flaws, the lines in the face, the faint and flattened scar across his left hand that looked like a burn, the barely perceptible tangles of grey in the hair. The way his mouth crimped slightly to the right when he looked at the patrolman. The way he took up space as if blocking a doorway to somewhere. The way... She still wasn't sure why he'd suddenly opted to join her in the virtuality. "You took your time," she said, a little more harshly than she'd intended. He shrugged. "Blame the genes. 13s run high resistance to hypnotic technique. I knew some guys back in Osprey who had to be sedated before they could use a V-format at all. Shall we go have a look at Tony?" The face led them across the sand to the closest of the data homes. Primary crime scene hung in the air beside it in holographic blue. Unusually, the adobe structure had a door. The patrolman worked the black iron latch and pushed the raw wood surface inward. It opened incongruously onto a prissily decorated suburban front hall. "My name is Cranston," said the face as it stood back to let them pass. "If you need departmental assistance, please call me. The victim is in the dining room, second door on the left. Feel free to touch or move anything, but if you wish the changes to be saved, you will need to advise me." They found Tony Montez sprawled on the dining room floor, not far from the section of wall where her blood and brains were splashed. She'd rolled when she fell and landed on her side, head turned, displaying the soggy mess of the exit wound. Her limbs were a seemingly boneless tangle, her feet bare. The faintly shimmering white corpse outline seemed to isolate her from the surroundings of her home as if preparatory to snipping her out of the picture. As they approached, supplementary data scrolled up over the body in neat holographic boxes. Tissue trauma, time of death, probable causes of secondary injuries, age, sex, race, genetic salience. "I hate that shit," said Sevgi for something to say. "Fucking convenience culture. It just gets in the way of what you try to see." "You can probably disable it." "Yeah." She made no move to summon Cranston. "Back when I started on the force, NYPD ran trials on this option where you could get the corpse to talk to you." Jesus, whose fucked up idea was that? But it was said absently. Marsalis knelt by the body, brow creased. "I don't know, some data geek with too much time on his hands looking for a creative edge. Rationale was it was to prevent desensitizing, supposed to bring back to you the fact that this was once a living, breathing human being." "Right." He took one of the dead woman's hands, which had fallen cupped loosely upward, and lifted it gently. He seemed to be stroking her fingers. Sevgi crouched beside him. "Well, they already had the models where you could get the victim to reverse from moment of death, back up, and then walk through the probable sequence of events. Guess it wasn't that much of a stretch." He turned to look at her, face suddenly close. "Can we do that here? You want to?" Another shrug. "We've got time to kill, haven't we?" "All right. Cranston?" The face shaded undramatically into being across the room from them, like a pre-millennial photo Sevgi had once seen developed chemically at a seminar. "What can I do for you?" Sevgi got up and gestured. "Can you run the crime event model for us? Last few minutes only." "No problem. You'll need to come through to the front room. That's where it seems to have started. I'll engage the system now. Do you want sound?" Sevgi, who'd watched a lot of this sort of thing, shook her head. "No, just the motions." "Then if you'll follow me." Unnervingly, the patrolman stepped directly through the wall. They left the body and took the more conventional route through the connecting door to the front room, where Cranston was waiting. As they came in, the sky outside the room's window darkened abruptly to night, and the drapes drew themselves partway closed like some cheap horror flick effect. An unharmed edition of Tony Montez stood in for the ghost. She shaded back to life in the center of the room, feet still shod in mint and cream espadrilles that picked up the colors in her skirt and blouse. Her makeup was intact, and she looked impossibly composed. A pace away from her, the system penciled in the perpetrator. It was a black outline of a man, a figure with the smooth, characterless features and standardized body mass of an anatomical sketch, all done in shiny jet. But it breathed, and it swayed slightly, and it sprang at Tony Montez and hit her with a savage, looping back fist. The image of the woman flew silently backward, tripped, and fell on the couch. One espadrille came off, flipped ludicrously high, and landed on the other side of the room. The black figure went after Montez, seized her by the throat, and punched her in the face. She flopped and slumped. The other espadrille came off. She pushed herself away along the couch, stumbled toward upright, while the black figure stood and watched with robot calm. When Montez got to her feet, it stepped in again and punched her high in the chest. She flew back into the drapes, rolled, staggered upright. She flailed with nails, got a backhand for her trouble that knocked her fully across the room. The edge of the open door to the hall caught her in the back. This time she went down and stayed down. The black figure stalked after her. "At this point," said the face, "the model estimates the killer force-marched Montez into the other room, threw her back against the wall, and shot her through the head. Reasons for the change of tactic are still under consideration. It may be that he was concerned the killing would be seen through the window to the street." The black figure bent over Montez and hauled her to her feet by the hair. It pinioned her arm into the small of her back and shoved her, struggling, toward the connecting door to the dining room. At the threshold, the two figures froze in tableau. "Would you like to relocate to view the final sequence?" Sevgi glanced at Marsalis. He shook his head. "No, turn it off." Montez and her black cut-out killer blurred and vanished. Marsalis walked through the space where they'd been, leaving Sevgi in the front room. When she followed, she found him knelt once more by the corpse, apparently reading the scroll-ups. "See something you like?" It was an old homicide joke, crime scene black humor. It was out of her mouth before she realized she'd said it. He looked up and seemed to be scanning the room. "I'm going to need to see prior record." She blinked at him. "Prior record of what?" "Her prior record." He indicated the sprawled corpse. "Montez." "Marsalis! She was a fucking housewife!" Angry, she realized, with herself, and the ease with which she'd slid back into crime scene macabre. She brought her voice down. "This is a suburban mother of two who sold real estate part-time. What record are you talking about?" He hesitated, got up and stared around the room again, as if he couldn't work out how Montez had come to be living with this decor. "Marsalis?" He faced her. "If this woman was a real estate saleswoman, I'm a fucking bonobo. You want to get some air?" She cranked an eyebrow. "In a virtuality?" "Figure of speech. There's got to be a briefing level somewhere in this format. How about we go there?" The briefing level was cut rate, a mesa top that you got to from anywhere in the construct by reciting a key code Cranston provided them with. The system switched, without any transition you could feel, to a viewpoint high up over the desert and the spread of data homes on the plain below. Over time, it appeared various AFPD detectives had imported their own custom touches, and now the mesa top was littered with favourite armchairs in clashing upholstery, a couple of tatami mats, a hammock strung on two thick steel hooks embedded, startlingly, in floating patches of brickwork, another slung more conventionally between two full-size palm trees, a pool table, and, for some inexplicable reason, a tipped-over antique motorcycle with an axe buried in its fuel tank. It was very quiet up there, just the wind catching on edges of rock in the cliff face below, quiet enough that you thought if you listened carefully you might be able to hear the faint static hiss of the base data systems turning over. Carl stared down at the adobe structures for a while, not listening for anything, thinking it over. The data homes seemed very distant, and he supposed that was appropriate. There was nothing here he needed to interest himself in more than superficially. He wondered how much to bother telling Ertekin, how much cooperation he needed to fake to keep her cop instincts cooled. "Look," he said finally, "that fight they've modelled down there is bullshit. Montez wasn't a victim. She fought this guy all the way. She knew how to fight. That's why the slippers came off. She didn't lose them in the battering. She kicked them off so she could fight better." "And you're basing this on what?" "Initially, instinct." He held up a hand to forestall her protest. "Ertekin, this isn't some fucked-in-the-head serial killer we're talking about. Merin came all the way to the Freeport just to kill this woman. That has to make her something special." "Maybe so. But it doesn't make her a combat specialist." "No, but her hands do." He raised both his own hands now, palms toward his face, fingers loosely curled halfway to a double fist guard. There's bone alloy marbling across the knuckles. You can feel it under the skin. Probably calcicrete. That's combat tech. Or part of a menopausal support regime. At 44? Ertekin shook her head stubbornly. "I looked through the file last night. There's nothing about combat training there. And anyway, it doesn't gel with the genetic trace material under her fingernails. You really think a combat pro would bother scratching her attacker?" "No. I think she did that when she'd already given up. when she'd already made the decision to let him kill her? Why would... He saw the way it dawned on her, the way her brow smoothed out and the heavy-lidded eyes widened slightly. In the Arizona construct sunlight, he realized suddenly that they were irised in flecked amber. "She knew we'd find it," she said. "Yeah." He looked somberly down at the data homes again. "Tony here was gathering evidence for us. Just think about that for a moment. This is a woman who knows she's about to die. A minute or less off her own death. She's calculating how to take this guy down posthumously. Now that is either psychotic force of will or training. Or a bit of both." They both stood in silence for a while. He glanced at her again and saw how the wind twitched her hair around the lines of her jaw. Tiny motion, barely there at all. But something about it set off an itching in the pit of his stomach. She must have felt some of it too, because she turned and caught him looking. He got the full, sunlit force of the tiger eyes for a moment, then she looked hurriedly away. "Gene analysis says no enhancement," she said. "Standard chromosome set. 23 pairs, no anomalies." "I didn't say there would be." He sighed. "That's the fucking problem these days. Anything extraordinary shows up in anyone, we all go running to the augment catalogue looking for correlation. Got to be something crammed into an extrasome, something fucking engineered. No one ever wonders if it might just be good old-fashioned heredity and formative conditioning." "That's because these days it mostly isn't." "Yeah, don't fucking remind me. Anyone wins anything these days, they're up there plugging some gene-frame consortium as soon as the cameras roll." Carl lifted his arms in acceptance, speech burlesque. "I'd just like to say I couldn't have done it without the good people at Amino Solutions. They truly made me what I am today." "Yeah, fuck off." She was giving him an odd look, he knew. "What?" "Nothing. Seems like an odd stance for you to be taking, that's all." "Oh, because I'm a 13, I've got to like this pay-and-load excellence we're all living with. Listen, Ertegun, they rolled the dice with me just like with you. No one dumped an artificial chromosome into me in vitro. I got 23 pairs just like you. And what I am is written all over them. There's no optional discard for shit like mine. No knockout sequencer in a hypo they can shoot me up with and make me safe to breed." "In which case," she said quietly, "I'd have thought you'd see the extrasomes as a step forward. For the next generation, at least." For a moment he could feel the rolling weight of his own pointless anger back and forth through his chest cavity like a punching bag left swinging. Images from the past 4 wasted months flickered jaggedly through his head. He put a clamp on it. "I'm a little short on that kind of outlook right now. But let's stick with Montez, shall we? I'll bet you this much. She's got a combat history, at a minimum a combat training history. If it doesn't show up in the prior record, then she hid it for some reason. She wouldn't be the first person to wind up in the Angeline Freeport wearing a brand new identity. Wouldn't be the first person to marry someone who knows nothing about who she used to be either, so you're probably wasting your time talking to the husband." "Yeah, usually the way." "How old were the kids?" 4 and 7. "His?" "I don't know." Ertegun reached up and made a gesture that split the virtuality open. She tugged down a data scroll, gently glowing text written on the air like some angelic missive. She paged down with delicate middle and ring finger motions, while the index finger kept the scroll open. "Yeah, first births, Republic registered. Looks like they moved to the Freeport shortly after. Second child was born there. So she's from the Republic too. Looks like it, yeah. You think that's relevant?" "Might be." Carl hesitated, trying to put the rest of it into words, the vague intimations he'd had while he watched the replay death of Tony Montez. "There's something else. The children were the obvious leverage, the reason she let him kill her." Ertegun made a gesture of distaste. "Yeah, so you said." "Yeah. So the question has to be, why did she believe him? He could have killed her and then still waited around and murdered the rest of her family. Why trust him to keep his word? You think her mother put in that situation has a choice? You think—" Ertegun, "she was making choices all the time. Remember the genetic trace under the nails? This isn't a civilian we're talking about. This is a competent woman making a series of very cold, very hard calculations. And one of those calculations was to trust the man who put a bullet through her head. Now what does that say to you?" She grimaced. The words came reluctantly. "That she knew him." He nodded. "Yeah. She knew him well enough to know she could trust his word. Now where does your suburban housewife mother of two part-time real estate sales lady make friends like that?" He went and sat in one of the hammocks while she thought about that. Chapter 16. Norton was waiting for them when they surfaced. Sergei blinked back to local awareness and saw him watching her through the glass panel on the couch cover. It felt a little like staring up at someone from underwater. She thumbed the release catch at her side, propped herself up on her elbows as the hood hinged up. "Any progress?" Her voice sounded dull in her own ears. Hearing thickened with the residual hum of the soundproofing. Norton nodded. "Yes, of the slow variety." "Do we get to go home?" "Maybe tonight. Nicholson pulled in Roth, and there's a full-scale diplomatic war in the making." He crimped a grin. "Roth is demanding a fully armed motorcade escort to Miami International, and fighter cover until we're out of Republican airspace. Really wants to rub their faces in it." "That's our Andrea." Sevgi hauled herself off the couch and upright, groggy from the time in virtual and lack of K-37. Despite herself, she felt a flicker of warmth for Andrea Walker Roth and the arrayed might of Colin's diplomatic muscle. She didn't really like the woman, not any more than the rest of the policy board. She knew Roth was, like all of them, first and foremost a power broker. But sometimes, Sev, it's good to have the big battalions standing behind you. "Yeah, well, my guess is the real pressure's coming from Ortiz." Norton gestured at the other couch, where Karl Marsalis was just sitting up. "Secretary-General nomination in the wind and all. He's going to be full of UN-friendly gestures for the next 8 months. Luck and a following wind, he could be your boss next year, Marsalis." The black man grimaced. "Not my boss. I'm freelance, remember? Fact remains, he's our best hope of not having to spend another night down here. There's a lot of Cullen subcontracting in this state. A lot of sensitive business community leaders who won't want waves made. That's the angle Ortiz will play while Roth goes down the wires to Washington." Norton spread his hands, turned back mostly to Sevgi. "My guess is we'll wait till nightfall. Just a case of sitting tight." Marsalis got up off the couch and winced. He worked one shoulder around in circles. "Something the matter?" Sevgi asked. He looked at her for a moment as if gauging the level of genuine concern in her voice. "Yeah. 4 months of substandard beta-myelin chloride." "Ah," said Norton. Marsalis flexed his right arm experimentally. A climber's stretch, palm to nape of neck, elbow up beside his head. He grimaced again. "Don't suppose you'd have any around?" Norton shook his head. "It's unlikely. Human traffic through Perez is down to a minimum these days. Not much call for mesh-related product. Can you hold on until we get to New York?" "I can hold on pretty much forever. I'd just rather not, if it's all the same to you. It's, uncomfortable." "We'll get you some painkillers," Sevgi promised. "You should have said something last night." "It slipped my mind." "Look, I'll check with supplies anyway," said Norton. "You never know. There might be some mothballed stock." "Thank you." Marsalis glanced between the two Colin officers, then nodded toward the door of the V-chamber. "I'm going to go for a walk. Be on the beach if you need me." Norton waited until he was gone. "Excuse me? If we need him? Is it just me, or is he the one who needs something from us right now?" Sevgi held down an unexpected smile. "He's a 13, Tom. What are you going to do?" "Well, not look very hard for his beta-myelin is what comes immediately to mind." "He did say thank you." "Yeah." Norton nodded reluctantly. "He did." He hesitated, and Sevgi could almost hear what he was going to say before he opened his mouth. She found herself, suddenly, inexplicably, saying it for him. "Ethan, right?" "Look, I know you don't like to—" She shook her head. "Doesn't matter, Tom. Maybe I'm way too sensitive around certain topics. Maybe it's time, right? You were going to ask about Ethan? If he was like this?" Small pause. "Was he?" She sighed, testing the seals on her self-control. Breath a little shuddery, but otherwise, fuck it, Sev, it's 4 years gone. You need to... To what? Need what? You need... something, Sev. Some fucking thing you need. Sigh again. Gesture at the door Marsalis just walked out of. Ethan was a different man, Tom. Ethan wasn't his gene code. He wasn't just a jazzed-up Area 13 and a custom-wired limbic system. He... Another helpless gesture. Do I see similarities? Yeah. Did Ethan have the same, hey, cut my fucking throat, see if I care, attitude? Yeah. Did Ethan make any normal male in the room itch up the way Marsalis is making you itch up? Yeah. Does that... Sev, I'm not... You are, Tom. She spread her hands, offered up the smile she'd repressed earlier. You are. It's how they built them. It's what they're for. And your reaction, that's how they built you. It's just that it took evolution 100,000 generations to put you together, and it took human science less than a century to build them. Faster systems management, that's all. What's that? A quote from the Project Lawman brochure? Sevgi shook her head, kept the smile. No, just something Ethan used to say. Look, you asked me if Ethan and this guy are alike. How would I know? Ethan used to get up half an hour before me every morning and grind fresh coffee for us both. Would this guy do that? Who knows? One way to find out, said Norton, deadpan. Sevgi lost her smile, leveled a warning finger. Don't even go there. Sorry. There wasn't much sincerity in the way he said it. A grin hovered in one corner of his mouth. Got to get down to Fifth Avenue. Sort out that sense of humor. You got that right. He grew abruptly serious. Look, I'm just curious is all. Both these guys do share some pretty substantial engineered genetic traits. Yeah? So what? Your parents engineered some similar genetic material into you and your brother way back at the start of Project Norton. Does that make the two of you similar? Norton grimaced. Hardly. So why assume that because Ethan and Marsalis have some basic genetic traits in common, there'd be any similarity in what kind of men they are? You can't equate them just because they're both variant 13, any more than you can equate them because, I don't know, because they're both black. Oh, come on, Sev, be serious. We're talking about substantial genetic tendency, not skin color. I am serious. No, you're not. You're flailing and you know it. It's not a good analogy. Maybe not for you, Tom. But take a walk out of that gate and see what kind of thinking you knock up against. It's the same knee-jerk prejudice, just out of fucking date like everything else in Jesus land. Norton gave her a pained look. His tone tugged toward reproach. Now you're just letting your union bigotry run away with you. Think so? She didn't want to be this angry, but it was swelling, and she couldn't find a way to shut it down. Her voice was tight with the rising pulse of it. You know, Ethan tracked down his source-mate mother once. Turns out she's this drop-dead smart academic up in Seattle now, but she's from here originally. From Florida? No, not from Florida. Sevgi waved a hand irritably. Louisiana, Mississippi, someplace like that. Jesus land, however you want to look at it. She grew up in the southern U.S. before secession. Norton shrugged. From what I hear, that's pretty standard. They got most of the source-mat mothers from the poverty belt back then, cheap raw materials. Fresh eggs for quick cash, right? Yeah, well, she was luckier. She let some West Coast clinic harvest her in exchange for enough cash to set up and study in Seattle. Point is, I went across there with Ethan to see her. Sevgi knew she was staring off into space, but she couldn't make herself stop that either. It was the last trip they'd made together. You wouldn't believe some of the shit she told us she went through, purely based on the color of her fucking skin. And that's a single generation back. You're talking about Jesus land, Sev. Oh, so who's pulling Union rank now? Fine. For the first time, anger sharpened Norton's voice. Look, Sev, you don't want to talk about this stuff, that's fine with me, but make up your mind. I'm just trying to get a lock on our newfound friend. Sevgi held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. She sighed. No, you're not, Tom. That's not it. No? Now you're a telepath? She smiled wearily. I don't need to be. I'm used to this. From before, from when I was with Ethan. This isn't about Marsalis. It's about me. Hey, a telepath, and modest, too. But she saw how he faltered as he said it. She shrugged. Suit yourself, Tom. Maybe you haven't spotted it yet. Maybe you just don't want to see it. But what you're really trying to get a lock on is Marsalis and me. How I'm going to react to him. How I am reacting to him. Norton stared at her for a long moment, long enough that she thought he would turn away. Then he gave her a shrug of his own. Okay, he said quietly. So how are you reacting to him, Sev? Norton was on the money about going home, if nothing else. It took the rest of the day to get clearance, and when it finally came, the crowds were still at the gate. Someone had set up big, portable LCLS panels along the road, jacked into car batteries or run off their own integral power packs. From the tower it looked like a bizarre outdoor art gallery, little knots of figures gathered in front of each panel or walking between. The chanting had died down with the onset of night, and the eventual arrival of 3 cherry-topped state police teardrops. They were parked now in among the other vehicles, but if the officers they'd brought were doing any crowd control, they were keeping a low profile while they did it. And the media had apparently all gone home. "Seen it before?" said the tower guard, a slim Hispanic just on for the graveyard shift. "Stadies usually chase them off, so there's no adverse coverage if the shit hits the fan. Shit does hit the fan, everyone runs the same sanitized broadcast the next morning. Tallahassee got deals with most of the networks, privileged access to legislature and like that. No one breaks ranks." "Yeah," rumbled Marsalis. "Responsible reporting. I'm going to miss that." The night wind coming off the sea was cool and faintly sown with salt. Sevgi felt it stir strands of hair on her cheek, felt cop instinct twitch awake inside her at the same moment. She kept herself from turning to look at him, kept her tone casual. "Going to miss it? Where are you going, then?" He did turn. She offered him a sideways glance, clashed gazes. "New York, right?" he said easily. "North Atlantic Union Territory, proud home of the Free American Press." She looked again. Locked stares this time. "Are you trying to piss me off, Marsalis?" "Hey, I'm just quoting the tourist guide here. Union's the only place they got Lindley versus NSA still in force, right? Still got their statue of Lindley up in Battery Park? Defender of truth, chiseled on the base? Most places I've been in the Republic, they've pulled those statues down." She let it go. Let the cop twitch, slide out of view for the time being, tagged for later attention. For the rest, she didn't know if she'd misread the irony in his voice or not. She was irritable enough to have done so. Maybe he was irritable enough to have meant it. She couldn't be bothered to call it either way. After a full day of waiting, none of them was in the best of moods. She shifted to the other side of the tower, swapped her view. Out at the far side of the complex, partially occluded by the towering bulk of the rack, the landing strip lights burned luminous green. They were far enough off for the distance to make them wink, as if they were embers the sea wind kept blowing on. Colin was sending a dedicated transport, flatline flight, so they'd be waiting a while longer. But it was on its way, and home was only a matter of hours away. She could almost feel the rough cotton sheets on her bed against her skin. Marsalis, she'd worry about later. After a couple of minutes, he left the tower top without comment and clattered back down the caged stairs to the ground. She watched him walk away in the flare of ground lighting, off toward the shore again. Casual lope, almost an amble but for the barely perceptible poise in the way he moved. He didn't look back. The darkness down to the beach swallowed him up. She frowned. Later. Worry about it later, Sev. She let her mind coast in neutral, watched the lights. And presently the Colin jet whispered down from the cloud base toward them, studded sparsely with landing lights of its own. It kissed the ground, silent with distance, and taxied in like a jeweled shadow. She yawned and went to fetch her stuff. In flight she dozed off and dreamed about the Lindley statue. Murat stood with her in winter sunlight, as he had when she was about 11, but in the dream she was an adult, and pointed at the chiseled legend in the base. From the discomfort of truth there is only one refuge, and that is ignorance. I do not need to be comfortable, and I will not take refuge. I demand to know. See, he was saying, it only takes one woman like this. But when she looked up at the statue of Lindley, it had transformed into the black-sketched perpetrator from the Montez CSI construct, and it leapt off the base at her, fist raised. She fell back and grappled, one from the manual, cross-block and grab. The figure's arm was slick in her grasp, and now ended, she saw, not in a fist, but a Greek theatre mask cut out of metal. As she wrestled with the sketch, she understood with the flash logic of dreams that her opponent intended to press the mask onto her face, and that once it was done, there would be no way to get it off. Across the park, a mother pushed a baby in a stroller. Two kids sat in the grass and duelled their glinting microfighter models high overhead, fingers frantic on the controls in their laps, heads tilting wildly beneath the blank-faced headsets. Her own fight went slower, sluggish, like drowning in mud. The construct murderer was stronger than she was, but seemed disinclined to tactics. Every move she made brought her time, but she could do no damage, could not break the clinch. The mask began to block out the sun on her face. "I have done everything I can," said Murat wearily, and she wanted to cry, but couldn't. Her breath came hard now, hurting her throat. Her father was walking away from her across the park toward the railings and the water. She had to twist her neck to keep him in sight. She would have called after him, but her throat hurt too much, and anyway she knew it wouldn't do any good. The fight started to drain out of her, tiny increments heralding the eventual evaporation of her strength. Even the sun was turning cold. She struggled mechanically, bitterly, and overhead, the mask. The plane banked about and woke her. Someone had lowered the cabin lights while she slept, and the plane's interior was sunk in gloom. She leaned across the seat to the window and peered out. Towers of crystalline light slid beyond the glass, red-studded with navigation flash. Then the long, dark absence of the East River, banded with bridges like jewelled rings on a slim and slightly crooked finger. She sighed and sank back in her seat. Home. For what it was worth. The plane straightened out. Marsalis came through from the forward section, presumably on his way to the toilet. He nodded down at her. "Sleep well?" She shrugged and lied. Chapter 17. By the time they disembarked and came through the deserted environs of the private carrier terminal at JFK, it was nearly 3 a.m. Norton left them standing just inside the endless row of glass doors onto the pickup zone and went to get his car out of parking. The whole place was full of a glaring, white-lit quiet that seemed to whine just at the edge of audibility. "So what's the plan?" Marsalis asked her. "The plan is to get some sleep. Tomorrow I'll take you over to Jefferson Park and get you hooked up with our chain of command. Roth, Ortiz, and Nicholson are all going to want to meet you. Then we'll look at Montez. If your theory checks out, there'll be some trace of a previous identity somewhere in the data record. You hope." "No, I know," she said irritably. "No one disappears for real anymore, not even in the Angeline Freeport." "Merin seems to be managing." "Merin's strictly a temporary phenomenon." They went back to staring averted angles around the terminal space until Norton rolled up in the snarl-grilled Cadillac. He'd held off putting the top up until a couple of weeks ago, but there was no way to avoid it now. The early hours air beyond the terminal doors had a snap in it that promised the raw cold of the winter ahead. "Nice ride," said Marsalis as he got in. He'd taken the front seat. Sevgi rolled her eyes and climbed in the back. Norton grinned at her in the mirror. "Thanks," he said, and gunned the mag drive as they pulled away. It didn't quite have the throaty roar of the vehicles from the period road movies he occasionally dragged Sevgi to at art house theatres in the village, but the car thrummed pleasantly enough, and they took the exit ramp at rising speed. Norton drifted them across into the curve of the city-bound highway. The airport complex fell away behind them like a flung fairy crown. Norton raised his eyes to the mirror again. "What are we doing about accommodation, Sev?" "You can put me in a hotel," Marsalis said, yawning. "Whatever suits. I'm not fussy." Sevgi faked a yawn of her own and slumped back in the seat. Let's sort that out tomorrow. Too much hassle coordinating it all now. You can stay at my place tonight. Tom, I'll bring him in and meet you at the office for lunch. Somewhere on the mezzanine. Say about 12. Peripheral vision showed her Norton trying to make eye contact in the mirror. His face was the carefully immobile deadpan she associated with his witnessing of mistakes made. He used it a lot in briefings with Nicholson. She gazed steadfastly out of the side window. "You could stay with me, Sev. I've got the space." "So do I." She made it come out casual, still watching the dull metal ribbon of the crash barrier as it whipped smoothly along beside the car in the gloom. A teardrop taxi blipped past on the opposing lane. "Anyway, Tom, it'd take you the best part of an hour just to clear out all that junk you keep in the spare room. All I have to do is crank down the futon. Just drop us off. It'll be fine." Now she turned and met his eyes in the mirror, matched him, deadpan for deadpan. He shrugged and punched up some music on the car's sound system, ancient secession-era punk no one played anymore. Detroitus or Error Code. Sevgi never could tell the two bands apart, despite Norton's best efforts to instruct her. She settled back to the outside view again and let the vitriol of it wash over her, lulled by the familiar high-stepping bass lines and the stuttering, hacking guitars. She found her mouth forming fragments of lyrics. "Got what you want at last, got your closed little world, got your superhero right and wrong, and your fucking flag unfurled." Marsalis stirred, leaning forward to read the player display, and sank back again without comment. Guitar fury skirled out of the speakers. The car slammed on through the night. When they pulled up outside Sevgi's building, Norton killed the engine and got out to see them to the door. It was a nice gesture, but it felt wrong. Harlem hadn't seen serious crime in decades, and anyway, in among the carbon fiber skeletons of the market stalls, figures were already moving around with crates, setting up. The place would be coming to noisy life in another couple of hours. Sevgi made a mental note to make sure the windows were all tight shut before she slept. She smiled wearily at Norton. "Thanks, Tom. You'd better get moving." "Yeah." He hesitated. "See you on the mezz, then," she said brightly. Yeah. 12 o'clock? Yeah, 12's good." "Where do you want to eat? Henty's or—" "Sure, Henty's." Backing away now. "Sounds good." He nodded slowly and went back to the car. She raised a hand in farewell. He pulled out, looking back. They watched him out of sight before Sevgi turned to the door of the building and showed the scanner her face. The door cracked open on a hydraulic sigh. "6th floor," she said, hefting her shoulder bag. "No elevator." "Yeah? Why's that, then?" "Period charm. You coming?" They took the stairs at a trudge. LCLS panels blinked awake on each floor as they climbed, then died to dimness in their wake. The bright white glow shone on pre-secession graffito-form murals and embedded holoshots of the building in its various stages of growth. Sevgi found herself noticing them for the first time in months, as consciousness of the man at her back lit everything for her the same way as the LCLS. She bit back the impulse to play tour guide. In the apartment, she went from room to room, showing him where things were. He went to use the bathroom as soon as she was done. She checked the windows while he was in there, set the locks, organized herself. Fetched sheets and a quilt from the cupboard in the ensuite. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror as she took the bed linen down and didn't recognize the look on her face. There was a warm, irritable confusion rising in her as to how she should do this. Back in the living room, she powered up the futon and remote extended it. She was putting on the sheets when he came out and joined her. "All yours," she said, finishing and standing back up. "Thank you." They stood looking at the crisp, clean sheets. He seemed to be waiting for something. Maybe in response, a circuit clicked shut somewhere inside her. She put her hands in her jacket pockets and hooked his gaze. "The door's double-locked," she said. "It's DNA-coded." His brow creased. Silent query. "Ah, fuck. Here we go." "You may as well know this now, Marsalis. You're going to find out sooner or later, so it may as well come from me. My last relationship was a 13. He's dead now. But I know how that shit works." She tapped fingertips to her temple. I know how you work up here. Right now, you're probably mapping the shortest possible route across town to East 45th and 1st. No visible reaction. She plunged on. And you're right. It's not far. 3-4 clicks and cross the lines, you're home free, UN territory, right here in the heart of New York. I'm not sure how they get you out after that, but my guess is the powers that be here in the Union wouldn't kick much. They've got a better working relationship with the UN than with Colin most of the time. Truth comes down, they don't like us much better than they do the Republic. That must be very upsetting for you. You're too kind. So like I said, I know what's in your mind. I don't even blame you much. It's not like you're a free actor here. You're locked into something you'd probably rather not be a part of. You're under duress. And I know how badly that plays in the 13 mindset. You're looking for a way to pick the locks or smash down the door. Ethan's words. He used to grin as he said them. That something burning grin. She waited to see what he'd do. If he'd move. He didn't. He raised an eyebrow instead, looked down at the open blade of his right hand. She recognized the displacement training, and a faint shiver ran through her. He cleared his throat. Well, it's nice to know I'm so well understood. But you see, Miss Ertegun, there seems to be a major flaw in your procedures here. If I'm the ravening, duress-shattering 13 motherfucker you... I didn't say... have me down as... Then what's to stop me caving in your skull here and now, slashing you open to get some warm blood for your precious DNA locks, and then doing my pre-dawn sprint across town after all? The lock only works off saliva. He stared at her. I could always scrape it out of your dead mouth. Do you think you're going to scare me, Marsalis? I couldn't care less if I scare you or not. For the first time since she'd met him, his voice tightened toward anger. You were fucking some burned-out genetic augment who said he was a 13, and you want to delude yourself I'm him. That's your problem. I don't know what I symbolise to you, Ertegun, what you want me to symbolise, but I'm not up for it. I'm not a fucking number, I'm not a fucking gene code, I'm Carl Marsalis. I think we met already. He stuck out his hand bluntly, mock offer of a clasp, then let it fall. But in case it hasn't sunk in, that's all I am. Got a problem with that? Then fuck off and deal with it somewhere I don't have to listen to you. They faced each other, either end of the stair, a couple of meters apart. To Sevgi, the room seemed to rock gently on the axis of their locked gazes. This is my house you're in, she reminded him. Then book me into a fucking hotel. He held her eyes for a moment, then looked down at the extended futon. One with room service that doesn't lecture the guests. Another pause. And an elevator. Out of nowhere, the laugh broke in her. She coughed it up. Right, she said. He looked up again, grimaced. Right. She seated herself on one arm of the couch, hands still tucked in her pockets, but she could feel the tension in her begin to ease. Marsalis raised an arm toward her and let it fall. I'm tired, he said. It wasn't clear if he meant it as an apology or information. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to try and run out on you. I'm going to get some sleep and see if we can't make a fresh start in the morning. Sound okay to you? Sevgi nodded. Sounds good. Yeah. He looked around, fixed on the futon again. Well, thanks for making up the bed. She shrugged. You're a guest. Could I get a glass of water? She stood up and nodded toward the kitchen. Sure. Chiller on the counter. Glasses are in the cupboard above. Help yourself. Thanks. No problem. Good night. She went to the bedroom and hooked the door closed behind her. Stood there for a while, listening to him move about in the kitchen. Then she took her right hand out of her jacket pocket, opened her palm, and considered the Remington stun spike it held. It looked innocuous, a short, thick tube in smooth matte grey. The charge light winked green at her from one end. Thrown hard or jabbed into the target by hand, it carried enough power to put anything human on the floor and leave it there for the best part of 20 minutes. She hesitated for a moment, then slipped the spike under her pillow, and began to get undressed. He lay flat on his back on the futon, head pillowed on his crossed palms, and stared at the ceiling. Still locked up, then? Stupid fucking bitch. Well, not really. She saw you coming 1,000 meters out. That makes her pretty fucking smart. He sighed and looked across at the window. 6 floors up, probably jacked into the same security as the door anyway. Not a chance. Could always... Oh, fuck off. Weren't you listening to Sutherland? Only do what you are happy to live with. She made your bed, for fuck's sake. You're out of the Republic, you're out of jail. How bad can it be? Sit it out, look at the case. Make some suggestions, let them get comfortable with you. If they want this to work, they can't keep a leash on you 24/7. He reached over for the glass and propped himself up to drink. So she's an unluck fucker. Doesn't seem the sort. The sort being? Zuli? Come on, that was a one-off. A twice-off, so far. Zuli's a friend. Yeah, a friend who likes to fuck unlucks on an occasional basis. Maybe it's me Zuli likes to fuck on an occasional basis. Ever think of that? Maybe my genetic status has fuck all to do with it. Right. And maybe this Urtikin woman just liked to fuck her unluck boyfriend for who he was too. Ah, go to sleep. He couldn't. The mesh sent rusty twinges through him, out of time with his pulse. Better deal with that tomorrow. Nearly 4 months of substandard chloride. You'll be lucky if it doesn't seize up on you soon. Seemed to work on Dudek and his pals. Yeah, this isn't some bunch of neo-Nazi fuckwits you're dealing with now. This is another 13. An adapted 13 by the sound of it. You'll need to be wired all the way right if you're going to... Why? Going to what? Couple of days and a dropped guard, we're out of here, remember? He went back to staring at the ceiling. Chapter 18. A bad chloride twinge kicked him awake. Bone-deep aching along his left forearm and sudden sweat from the intensity of the pain. He'd curled up around it instinctively in his sleep, and there was a faint whimper trapped in his throat as he woke. Aunt Chitra's pain management training, the silent imperative. Take the pain, breathe it under control, and don't make a fucking sound. He swallowed and rolled over, protecting the aching limb with his other arm. Remembered he was in Sevgi Ertekin's home, and relaxed. The whimper got free as a low groan. The room was full of barely filtered light. There were varipolara drapes at the windows, and someone had forgotten to opaque them all the way down the night before. His watch said it was a little after 9. He grunted and flexed the fingers of his left hand, chased the pain to fading. The mesh, for reasons the Mars Tech biolabs apparently still didn't understand, remembered injury trauma and tended to overload the system in those parts of the body that had suffered it in the past. Fine, so long as you fueled the system right. The worst you got was a faint warmth and itching at the site of previous wounds. But with the shit he'd been buying from Louis over the last few months, the neuromuscular interfacing would be ragged and inflamed. And Carl had once stopped a Saudi ops dog with that forearm. Some monstrous engineered hybrid, ghost-pale and snarling as it materialized out of the desert night and leapt at his throat. The impact put him on his back. The jaws sank into the bone, and even after he killed the fucking thing, it took them nearly 5 minutes to break the bite lock and get it off him. He listened for sound through the apartment. Heard nothing. Evidently Ertekin was still out cold. No chance of going back to sleep now, and the door was still locked. He thought about it for a moment, then got up, pulled on his pants and padded through to the kitchen. A brief search of the cupboards produced coffee for the espresso machine in the corner. Olympus Mons Robusta blend. From actual Mars Tech Gene Labs. Yeah, right. He allowed himself a sour grin and set up the machine to make 2 long cups, then went to the fridge for milk. There were a couple of long life cartons open, one weighing in about half full, the other a lot less. On impulse he sniffed at the torn cardboard openings on both, pulled a face, and upended each carton carefully, one after the other, over the sink. With the least full of the 2, the contents came out slow and semi-solid, splattered across the metal in slimy white clots. He shook his head and rinsed the mess away. You and Zuli'd get on like a fucking house on fire, he muttered, and went back to the cupboards to find more milk. Who are you talking to? He turned with the fresh carton in his hand. The kitchen had filled with a smell of coffee, and either that or the noise he was making rummaging in the cupboards had woken Ertekin. She stood in the kitchen doorway, eyes heavy-lidded, hair stuck up in clumps, wearing a faded NYPD T-shirt several sizes too big for her, and, as far as he could tell, nothing much else. The look on her face wasn't friendly. "Singing," he said, "to myself. I made coffee." "Yeah, so I fucking see." He raised an eyebrow. "You're welcome." She looked back at him for a moment, impassively, then turned away. He caught the lines of her hips under the T-shirt, the length of her thighs as the about turn brought her legs together. "What time is it?" "About 9:30. "Fuck, Marsalis." Her voice trailed away, back toward the bedroom. "What you got? Insomnia or something?" Sounds of water splashing, a door closing it off. A sudden, unlooked-for image opened in his head. Sevgi Ertekin strips off her T-shirt and steps into the shower, hands gathered under her chin beneath the stream of warm water, arms pressing breasts flat, and... He grinned wryly and derailed the internal Xperia script before it reached his groin. Finished making the coffee anyway. It came out rich and creamed with bubbles, steaming an aroma that kicked him straight back to the dusty bubble fabs of Huari camp. The ominous itch on his skin of sunlight through an atmosphere only recently made thick enough to breathe, the uneasy pull of Mars' gravity, the loose grip of a planet that didn't recognize him as its own and didn't really see why it should hold on to him. Coffee in aluminium canisters, dust crunching underfoot, and Sutherland at his shoulder rumbling speech like the reassuring turnover of heavy plant machinery. "Nothing human scale around here, Soak. Just shade your eyes and take a look." And the staggering, neck-tilting view up Massif Verne, to drive the other man's point home. He sipped the coffee, pulled a surprised face. From actual Mars Tech Gene Labs was right. He hated it when reality bore out the clanging boasts of the hype. He poured the coffee into 2 mugs, took one for himself and left hers to get cold on the kitchen counter. Serve her fucking right. Sipping at his own cup, he went back to the living room and peered out at the market below. He didn't know the city well, and this part less than most, but Ertekin's building was a pretty standard nanotech walk-up, and he guessed the open plaza below had been a part of the same redevelopment. It had the faintly organic lines of all early nano-build. He knew parts of southeast London that looked much the same. Buildings in a bucket. Just pour it out and watch them grow. He heard her come out of the bedroom, heard her in the kitchen. Then he could feel her in the room with him, at his back, watching. She cleared her throat. He turned and saw her on the other side of the room, dressed and somewhat groomed, coffee mug held in both hands. She gestured with the drink. "Thanks." She looked away, then back. I'm not great first thing in the morning." "Don't worry about it." Randomly, for something to fill the quiet between them. "Possible sign of greatness. Nor was Felipe Sousa by all accounts." Flicker of a smile. "No?" "No. Did all his molecular dynamics work at night. I read this biography of him once I got back to Earth. Seemed appropriate, you know. Anyway, book says when they took him on at UNAM, he refused to lecture before midday. Great guy to have as a tutor, right? Not for you. Well, my head starts to spin once you get past basic buckyball structure, so... No, I meant the morning thing." She gestured with the cup again, one-handed this time, a little more open. "You wouldn't be..." "Oh, that," he shrugged. "It's the training. Never really goes away." Quiet opened up again in the wake of his words. The conversation caught and scraping in the shallow waters of her continued embarrassment. He reached for something to pull them clear again, something that had flared dimly in his mind the previous night as he finally arced downward towards sleep. "Listen, I've been thinking. You guys debriefed the on-board gin for Hawkins Pride, right? Back in June when this all started." "Yeah?" Her voice stretched a little on the word quizzical. He liked the sound it made. He fumbled after follow-up. "Yeah, so who'd you have do it? In-house team?" She shook her head. "I doubt it. We got transcripts handed down, probably some geek hired out of MIT's machine interface squad. They handle most of our N-Gin work. Why? You think there's something they missed?" "It's always a possibility." A skeptical look. Something you'd pick up? Okay. Maybe not something they missed as such. He sipped his coffee, gestured. Just something they weren't looking for because I wasn't on the scene. A close link between Merrin and me. Something that'll put me next to him. A link? You said you didn't know him. I don't, directly. Come on, Ertegun, you were a cop. You must know something about complexity theory, social webbing. She shrugged. Sure. We got the basics in our demodynamics classes, Yaroshenko intuition, Chen and Douglas, Rabani, all the way back to Watts and Strogatz, all that small world networks shit. So what? You know, once you get out on the streets for real, most of that demodynamics stuff's about as useful as poetry in a whorehouse. He held back a grin. Maybe so. But small world networks work, and the Variant 13 Club on Mars is a very small world, as is Mars itself. I may not know Merrin, but I'm willing to bet you can link me to him in a couple of degrees of separation or less, and if those links are there, then nothing's going to spot them out better than an engine. Yeah, any engine. Why's it got to be Hawkins' Pride? Because Hawkins' Pride was the last gin to see Merrin alive. It stands to reason that... Soft chime from the door. Ertegun glanced at her watch reflexively. Confusion creased in the corners of her eyes. Guess Tom just doesn't trust the two of us together, Carl said deadpan. The confusion faded out, traded for a disdain he made as manufactured. She crossed to the door and picked up the privacy receiver. Yes? He saw her eyes widen slightly. She nodded, said yes a couple more times, then hung up. When she looked at him again, there was a fully fledged frown on her face. He couldn't decide if she was worried or annoyed, or both. It's Ortiz, she said. He drove here. He covered his own surprise. What an honor. Does he collect all his new hires by limousine? Not since I've been working there. So it must be me. He'd intended it to come out light and supple with irony, but somewhere, sometime in the last 4 months, he'd lost the knack. He heard the weight in his own words, and so did she. Yeah. She looked at him over her coffee mug. It must be you. He'd met Ortiz a couple of times before, but doubted the man would remember him. Both meetings were years in the past. Both had been swathed in the glassy smile insincerity of diplomatic visits, and Carl had been only one of several Variant 13 trackers in a queue of agency staff lined up to press the visiting flesh on arrival. Munich, too, was in process. There was talk of Colin coming back to the table to approve the accords, fully this time, and everyone was walking on eggs. Back then, Carl recalled vaguely he hadn't been that interested, Ortiz was a newly recruited policy advisor, fresh from a political career in the Rim States and not yet a major figure in the Colin hierarchy. Detail had faded, but Carl remembered grizzled hair and a tan, a slim-hipped dancer's frame that belied the other man's 50-something years. A slight lift to the serious brown eyes that might have been Filipino ancestry or just bioscalp to suggest the same to voters. A good smile. For his own part, Carl had been busy enjoying the comforts of his newly reacquired anonymity at the time. The media focus attendant on his rescue and return from Mars and the Felipe Sousa had died down to his relief the previous year. The celebrity machine, in the absence of any attempt on his part to restoke the fires of its interest, had grown bored with him and moved on. Sure, he'd made it back alive and sane from a nightmarish systems breakdown in deep space, but what else had he done recently? Ungla was sealed up tight, bureaucratically impassive, not the kind of brightly confected media play the networks liked at all. The high-profile cases were still to come. Meanwhile, some adolescent son of African royalty was up and about on the Euro scene, deploying his extrasome capacity at a Cambridge college and his polished jet good looks in the DJ-votional clubs of West London. The Bannister family were settling, amid some local acrimony, into their union citizenship. A Thai Xperia star was getting married, and so on. The unblinking media eye rolled away, and Carl felt its absence like the sudden cool of shade from the Martian sun.
This is the end of the CD. The program continues on the next CD.